Resolution 2015-24, accept feasibility report and call for public hearing, DeRosier Drive.
The feasibility report, I do have a copy of it at my desk if anybody would like to read it. I'll go through it this evening. We would potentially be including this with the city project number 373, the previous ones that we've included. So right now, I'll go through the feasibility report and let you know kind of what we found on the particular project. We did receive a petition from roughly 36% of the property owners. It would be this segment on the south where we received the petition to extend sewer and water along DeRosier Drive. You can see it circled there. It's roughly just shy of 1,000 feet that we'd be looking at extending sewer and water. The pavement is in good condition. It does have a Pacer rating of 7. It's roughly 15 years old, which is getting close to the end of its life, but it is showing good condition out there. One thing to note, it is substandard in terms of the pavement width. It's only paved to 22 as opposed to our minimum 24 that we would have for a rural section. There's no city water or sewer along that section of DeRosier Drive. Back in 2003 when we did the Riverwood extension, they did stub out sewer and water on both Mississippi Boulevard, which is on the west side of the project, or on the west side of DeRosier Drive, and on Riverwood Drive. So there's sewer and water stubbed out, just not down that section of the road. Here's kind of a street view of what that road looks like. You can see, we do have the transverse cracking, which would be a good candidate for preventative maintenance. All in all, it's showing good signs in terms of the pavement condition. That's probably because this section of road doesn't see a whole lot of traffic. You've got the single-family homes on the north side, and so there's really not a lot of traffic that comes down through here to really beat that pavement up, so it's able to withstand or extend the life of that pavement there. Looking at the proposed improvements, we would extend the sanitary sewer, 8-inch sanitary sewer from Riverwood Drive west, roughly 1,000 feet. Sewer services and water services will be stubbed out to the various property lines of the individual properties. We would have an 8-inch water main. This would be assessed at a 6-inch cost. And the reason for that is looking at this section of DeRosier Drive, if we were to loop the water main up to Mississippi Boulevard where we would ultimately connect, we could get by with the 6-inch water main to have enough fire flow protection. But because the sanitary sewer basically runs out of room at that 1,000-foot mark, we would only extend the water main to that point. So in order to get the proper fire flow protection for all the property owners around here, we'd be looking at upsizing that to an 8-inch until that final section gets constructed. So we'd be looking at a little bit bigger pipe for this initial section, then we'd be necking down back to that 6-inch to complete the project. The storm sewer, in terms of the storm events, that would be handled by the ditches that you currently see out there. Up in the Riverwood area, they have good soil in terms of good sand, so it infiltrates. And they do have a nice rural section in terms of a ditch that's able to handle that stormwater runoff. We would replace all of the blacktop and pavement section with 5 inches of aggregate base and 2-inch bituminous pavement. Looking at the costs, construction comes in at $213,722 or $720. The contingency is $32,058. Engineering at $36,867. For a total project cost of $282,645. Looking at funding of the project, the assessments would come in at roughly 51%. We kind of touched on it earlier in terms of why the assessments along this portion of this segment that we're looking at tonight would be more expensive than, say, 3rd Street or something like that. And that's because those road sections already have city water and sewer in it, so they would be paying a replacement cost as opposed to a new cost. This would be assessed at a new utility cost, so the assessments on these would be higher. Looking at the assessment rates, you've got the front footage at $20 a foot. If you recall, the 32-foot wide urban section was at $37. The 36-foot wide urban section was at $40. So this is less expensive, mainly because of the curb and gutter costs and storm sewer costs would not be included. Mainly the curb and gutter costs are So we do have a side footage, if somebody has a side yard, there's one off of Riverwood, I believe, that falls into that category, that'd be assessed at $10 per lineal foot. The new sewer cost is at $30, same with the water main cost is at the full $30. A 4-inch sewer line and 6-inch sewer line are at $800 and $1,000 respectively. And then the water services for the 1-inch and the 6-inch is at $1,200 and $1,900 respectively. A couple things to note before we get into the questions. We did look at putting the sanitary sewer on the south side or the north side of the corridor to try to preserve some of that pavement. When we looked at doing that, there's a couple things that come into play. Likely we could get permission from the southern property owner to be able to work on that portion of it. But there is a private property owner over here that was not included on the petition where we would need to get permission to work as well as do construction for that section to extend sewer and water. We have extended a stub out of Riverwood. The sewer is down the middle, same with the water, it's 12 feet off of there. So we would have to open cut that first section, bring it either south or north, and then extend it out. By doing that, you would have to directional drill underneath the street. By directional drilling, you cannot guarantee as flat of a grade for your sewer, so you're not going to get as much depth to the sewer to be able to serve these homes. So, for instance, instead of having 7 feet of cover for these homes to be able to connect up into that sewer service, you may only have 6 feet. Now, by having that reduced amount of cover on it, now you may have to require those properties to have like a grinder station or a pump to be able to get into that sewer. So by laying this open cut in through there at the center of the street, you're able to lay your pipe at a flatter grade for those services so that they can not have to have a mechanical device and a pump to be able to get into the sewer. So my recommendation would be to open cut DeRosier Drive, even though the pavement is in decent shape. That'll allow the property owners on the north and south to be able to access that without having to have a pump in their basement to access that.
What's the cost difference?
There's only about $15,000 difference in costs from the city's standpoint to open cut it versus directional drill. If you directional drill, you have the potential of having to open cut those services anyways. Looking at directional drilling, generally speaking, there's a couple things that come into play on how fast you can get it to grade. The directional drill machine sits at ground level, and then it has a rod that goes down underneath the ground until it gets how deep you want it. Either the pipe diameter, meaning how much that pipe can flex, is a determining factor, and the drill machine, the rod, because they're all steel rods and they only bend at the joints. In our case, because we have small pipe, we're looking at 4 and 6 inch, they can bend pretty tight with that type of material. It's the rod itself that is a limiting factor for us. So you're looking at about 50 feet from where the drilling machine sets up to where they're going to be at depth. So if we're looking on the south side, we would have to have, and I'm going to exaggerate here, we're going to have the machine sitting back here to drill over there so that when it hits right here, if we were to put the main there, it's at its 8-foot depth mark before it comes across. When you're directional drilling, because you can't see what you're actually drilling through, there's a tendency for that pipe to do a little bit of this. Go up and down and not get a constant flat grade. And so they like to put those pipes at a steeper grade so that they can take into account that difference in grade. So you maintain flow, you have to have a steeper grade. That's what reduces the cover or the depth to be able to serve those properties. So it makes sense to spend a little bit of extra money to get a new road and make sure that you have enough depth to be able to serve those as best you can.
Plus, it could be a freezing issue.
It could be a freezing issue. I would be more concerned with now requiring some of those homes to put in a lift pump, you know, a grinder station, something like that, to be able to pump their waste into the sewer as opposed to just gravity.
Lori, I don't know if it makes a huge difference, but on the backside of the numbers
I
there.
saw that before.
What is the wish of the council on resolution 2015-24?
I make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Got a motion by Councilman Kuschek and a second by Alderman Hercog. For approval of resolution 2015-24. Discussion?
As you had a 24-foot pavement, is that consistent with other streets in the neighborhood?
It's consistent with other streets in the neighborhood that were built while they were in the city limits. I can't say, I don't know right off the top of my head if those that were built prior to the annexation, if they were, you know, 22-foot wide. I can say those that were built while they were in the city limits, that it's 24 foot, yes.
And what is the right of way?
I want to say it's 66 feet over
66?
there. I believe so, yes. Yep.
We're just calling it a feasibility report.
Yes.
For a public hearing.
This resolution here is to call for the public hearing, so this would be notifying those property owners that would be assessed basically the first 1,000 feet. Letting them know that the council wants to hear their input. This would take a 5/8 vote to get that public hearing aspect of it. Similar to what we had tonight where the residents came in to voice their opinion one way or another. That's what we're looking for tonight, is to accept the feasibility report and call for the public hearing so we can get their input.
Is there a time limit on how good the feasibility report is? 'Cause we already covered, basically, we don't have the funding for this project.
We still might have the funding for it, depending on how much you would like to levy for. Looking at the stuff, the breakout here. So right now we've got, you know, 5th Street, 3rd Street, and 1st Street Northwest kind of laid out. We're at that $1.3 million in terms of what we'd be spending next year. If we were to include the DeRosier Drive, we'd be at the 1.6 million. That is obviously on the high end of what we would want to spend. It's all dependent upon what the council's comfort level is for construction projects. I mean, this would obviously bring in additional tax revenue for the city, for the tax base, but it's really dependent upon what the council wants to move forward with.
So Brandon, how many lots are on that south side, or, Terry, do you know how many? There's just one lot,
8.8 acres. correct.
8.8.
Yep.
Not including there is one on the corner as well.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. There's a house on the corner of DeRosier and, where it is, Redwood.
Yep.
And there's another house just south of that, which we own, and then our lot starts from there. So in DeRosier, there is one house that's got a fairly long side yard, and then we have one lot.
There's this property right here that owns basically a side yard on DeRosier Drive. Everything else would be Mr. Roach's.
So realistically, they could put 8 to 10 homes in there pretty easy.
Pretty easily. We did kind of a first crack, if you will, at laying out what just a hypothetical scenario would be. I'll be honest, we didn't spend a whole lot of time, and we figured they could get probably 14 lots, if not more, in that 8.8 acres.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking as far as tax bases would generate to town, if they do, you know,
Right.
you put in 8 homes or 10 homes at $40 million homes or $200,000 homes, the tax base what would it take for the city to recoup its tax base to
Right.
to pay for that project?
Right. I would say you'd be at least be able to get 14 lots out of that.
I have a question with that then, because the houses on the north side are all on an acre each?
Roughly, yes, 3/4 of an acre.
Because it's in the city now, it doesn't require that anymore?
Because it's in the city, and if sewer and water would be extended past there, you can have the smaller lot sizes. But because they have a septic system, they have to have more area to be able to have a well and
It
septic.
doesn't matter what existing things are in the neighborhood, they wouldn't have to match that?
True, it doesn't. You have to, what you look at is your zoning, your R1 zoning, and then that will dictate what the lot size would be.
What is it a lot in Little Falls? What does it have to be? How big?
In an R1C, it has to be 16,000 square feet.
Which is basically what, quarter of an acre roughly?
Roughly, yeah.
As we're talking financing, a couple of points, if we were to do that, general obligation funds for the revolving fund, I believe David said that we probably wouldn't do that unless we saved 100,000.
Correct, on the refunding bonds?
The refunding, yeah.
Right.
And so that's one financing thing, and is it not true that at the end of this year, going into next year, that our debt will be dropping considerably?
I'd have to go back and look, I don't remember, but I
That-
think
that's
it's
what
in
we-
2016, I think is when,
Okay.
our
Maybe it is.
2017 levy, I think 2016. I think it goes down some, but then it goes down more, like in 2 years. One other thing that you can consider, I believe, is if you want to, at least do the feasibility report, when we bid these construction projects before, we bid them in, by each area. So you can get to that point and see what the bids come in at. And if the bids should come in better than what we think, then you still have the ability to order in all the projects. If the bids come in higher than what we're anticipating, then at that point in time, you can award bids for 3 of the 4 projects or 4 of the 5 projects, however you decide to do it. So just because you're doing this, you're still not ordering in that project. You're doing the feasibility, you're doing the public hearing. You can even, call for the
Public hearing.
going out for bids. But once you get those bids, if you don't like what they are, they're, depending on what they do financially, you can at that point in time pick out, one of the projects and not award it.
Right, and if that'd be a good option, and if that is the option that the council wants to pursue, we would just have that as an alternate on the bid form so they can clearly see what is that particular project.
Greg, and I know we've asked you this before, the feasibility report is the cost to,
We've already done the feasibility report. That was minimal in terms of our cost and expense. So next we'd be looking at the public hearing, similar to what we had tonight on the other street portions. We'd be inviting those residents in that would be potentially assessed to get their input into the project as well.
I'm just looking at the investment we would have if we, after the feasibility report and the public hearing, we said, okay, we're not gonna do it.
It would be less than $2,000 in terms of staff time and such.
We talked about increased tax base, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be built on anytime soon. Right? That's up to you, you have to decide that.
It's up to the applicant, yes. I know in just discussions, they were indicating that they were looking at something in the near future, but we haven't seen anything concrete in terms of building permits or anything like that, no.
Probably be more likely to build if there was water and sewer service.
That's a good, fair assumption, yes.
Yes.
So is there a way to approve this contingent on
What I would,
a development that's gonna, or, housing permit,
what I would
coming down the road, or?
What I would recommend is approve this, Then you go to your public hearing, which would be on the 16th of March.
Yep.
We do have a planning commission meeting on the 19th, whether or not we have, an applicant in terms of zoning in that area is unforeseen. We can, assuming we approve this portion of the project on the 16th, then we would look to go out for bids probably on, that night. We would probably approve, authorize staff to pull together the plans and specs, and then we could get the specs together and then go to get the bids pulled together. Once we have that, there's likely going to be a situation where we will know as a city whether or not they would be looking at construction this year or 2016 or even further out. So I would say we can get to that point and know before the shovel hits the ground if something will happen this year in terms of development.
Right, well, that's, I wonder, they come in petition for it, but, if we do a little good faith deal that we'll put it in next year, if they're gonna develop next year type of deal, so they ain't gonna spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get a development or whatever put together, and then all of a sudden decide that they can't have sewer and water.
Right.
So
I guess it would be,
what you're saying is have a public hearing, and then our recommendation would be upon if it's contingent on them building or not. Can you stretch it out like that?
I've never stretched it out like that before.
Oh, I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah. I would say, we can have it as an alternate on the bid form, and we'll know roughly in May. Right now, I've got May 4th tentatively listed as the bid opening for the project. So we would be able to know in May if we want to move forward with that. At that point, if the desire is not to develop that land this year, then we can always pull it and look at it again next year.
Which would mean another public hearing.
It would need another public hearing next year, if that's the case, yes.
any other questions? We got a motion by Councilman Bushek and a second by Councilman Wildren? Hurkok?
Yep.
Alderman Hurkok? Okay. For resolution 2015-24. No further discussion? Call roll.
William,
Yes.
Hurkok,
Yes?
Liljegren,
Yes.
Silka,
Yes?
Hansler,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Bushek,
Yes.
Knopfler.
Yes.
Carries.